we have a very special guest today. But first, I'm looking good, feeling good, loving life. I hope you can say the same thing. Today, our guest, he is an international traveler. He's a wrestler. He's a marketer. He's also a trainer. He is Mr. Shirley Doe. How are you today?
Good to see you.
Thank you for being here today. We're going to jump right into it.
Okay, sounds good.
How did the love of wrestling start for you?
I was thinking about this morning, so I knew we were going to do this. I was trying to analyze it. 1977.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, I was 5 years old, and 22 here ran still WWF, wasn't WWF. And I don't remember the exact first match I watched, but I remember seeing the Samoans lose the tag belts to, I think it was Gurria and Zbyszko. And then I remember seeing the Samoans win back, and I remember being upset that the Samoans won. So that was the first time, like, I'd probably seen wrestling and other things before. That was the first time I had an emotional reaction to it. My parents would get ready. This sounds weird, me talking about church, my gimmick and everything. But my parents would get ready for church early, after us. We'd get ready before them. And my brother and I would wait till the commercials and just kick the crap out of each other. And we watched wrestling for 3 or 4 years when our parents caught on. And then when wrestling started getting somewhat big, this is even before Hogan, it's like 1980 actually. My parents said on New Year's Eve, you can watch anything you want. We knew WR had it at midnight. Like, well, we want to watch wrestling. Somehow my brother and I knew every single guy. Do you know what I mean? Like, how did you know all these guys when we've been watching it for 3 years? But I can tell you past that, like, it went from love to obsession. And I'm sure you're the same way. I always look at this like sliding scale of how we love wrestling. There's people that'll love it, and then they're like 12 or 13, kind of like comics too, and they're like, yeah, I don't care anymore, and they discover girls or whatever.
Right.
And they're the maniacs like us. They're like, oh, I still love wrestling till I'm like 18, 19. And then they're the real maniacs like you and me, where it's like, yeah, it's not enough just to watch it. Like, what can I do next?
Right.
Yeah.
Did you have any favorites early on growing up?
Yeah, I really like Don Morocco was my favorite guy. Because Bob Backlund was the champion. I don't remember when Backlund was on there.
Sure, of course.
And like, he was so milquetoasty. Do you know what I mean? Compared to like, and it's funny because Bruno was like still kind of a heel when you watch him wrestle. So like, I think everybody, because all we got in Pittsburgh obviously at the time was WWF. So like, I think the things I reacted. I didn't like Backlund because he was so scientific and stuff.
Sure.
Morocco was just so funny. Like, he would do the promos where he'd eat sandwiches, and he had Captain Lou with him. And the first live show I went to was at CCBC, where ECW ran the pay-per-views, the Golden Dome. And the main event was Morocco and Backlund. And I'd only seen squash matches on TV. So to see a match where the heel got beat, like a pushed heel got beat clean, was really weird. You know what I mean? Because I didn't know that happened. So he hit the I think he called it the Hawaiian Hammer at the time, because he also called the Spike that too. He hit the Tombstone Pile Driver, had Backlund 1-2, and I'd never seen a foot on the ropes, so I was like as Mark gets. His first live show, he got his foot on the ropes, and I lost my voice. Like, I had to go to speech therapy in school after that. Like, legit, they gave me this big stupid watch I had to wear, and you had to pull it every time you wanted to scream, because it was supposed to make you stop screaming. And if you see me wrestle now, I scream all the time, so I must have learned how to do it right. But like, I was so upset that Don Morocco lost. And so I think I was a heel fan way early. And I think the good thing was, especially, we started reading all the after mags, and you know, I'm sure we have really parallel paths of how we fell into wrestling. And like, I cared more about the other territories. So then when Hogan came, like, I didn't care about Hogan. And like, when Terry Funk came in, I was like, oh yeah, Terry Funk's here. Like, any of the cowboy guys, I don't know why, I like really gravitated to like Funk, Hansen, Black Bart, like all those kind of dudes. And then guys that were like big, anyone that would just beat guys up. Later on, this is like Vader and the Bam Bam and those kind of guys that were bigger. It's just how I always thought through stuff. Obviously Cactus, like when I got older, was a huge influence. But at the time, I'd say, yeah, probably Morocco was my big guy. And Playboy Buddy Rose was another one. Because when he was there, he was the first guy I saw really do comedy stuff. And he would come out in a limousine with like 10 models. And it was like, kind of like he'd do the Ric Flair thing up there, but he was so fat. Do you know what I mean? And like, he would come out with all these really hot girls, and I remember it would piss my dad off. And like, nothing really made my dad upset. And he's like, look at that guy with those girls. And he would get so upset about it. My dad's super level-headed. And the first time we went to shows, my mom went nuts for Tony Gurria. Like, she was in love with Tony Gurria, like screaming for him. And I'm like, how can this art, I didn't think it was an art form yet, I just thought it was wrestling. But how can this cause visceral reactions in people that don't have reactions? Like, that's what's cool about wrestling. It switches someone that's super level-headed into like being a screamer and being a yeller, and that's awesome. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's when I fell in love with it.
I'm still taken back by the fact that your mom Tony Gurria, of all guys. I mean, I've never in my life, as long as
babyface then, though. This is like
I understand,
77,
but still,
Well,
of
when he was-
everybody that a babyface on that show, you know, to get connected, feel attached to Tony Gurria, that's
I think
something
it was
else.
the forearm tattoos.
Ah.
It was rough looking.
All right.
But like years later, when he was an agent, I was at a show, and I was maybe like 19, and my parents wanted to go see a show, so they came, and we talked to him, and I told him the story. And this is years after he had stopped wrestling, and he came out and got a picture with my mom, and it like made her whole day. But like, yeah, if you mention Tony Gurria now, he's one of those guys that will never make he'll make that sub Hall of Fame that like why is Lord Alfred Hayes in that sub Hall of Fame versus that's a tangent. But you know what I'm
Sure. So let's move forward a few years. At some point, you had to have found out about independent wrestling. How did that come about?
They used to run shows in my hometown from Elwood City, PA. So like Freedom, where the school, the Cactus, and T. Rancho and Shane Douglas went, was really close. So they would run shows there at like the Sons of Italy or at the high school. And then by the time I was in high school, they would run shows maybe once a year. So I would volunteer all the time to actually set up rings and do stuff. And then just through college, I just like stayed where there were shows. But it's so weird, like back then. So I started college in '90. So this is how far we ahead of the internet. To find out there was a show and to know there was a show and get ready in advance for it, it was impossible.
Mm-hmm.
So you would find out about a show and you would have to drop plans. I think the biggest, and the show that really made me think I could do it was in Newcastle. This is maybe '94. There was a show at the National Guard Armory there, and Cactus and Shane worked the main event, and they did like a Falls Count Anywhere match. And Cactus did this spot where he got a garbage can over his head, and when he came out, he had chicken bones in his hair, and he was covered in trash. I've done that same spot like a million times, and it's like just subconsciously you pick up these things and they become you. And I think seeing that was such a like imprinting reaction, like, oh, that's what stuff you should do in front of a crowd. But yeah, we tried to find any shows we could. It was where they have, and it's funny. Like I was thinking about this. I was traveling for my other job this week, and the first thing I do when I get in a hotel room to this day is flick around the TV to see if there's any wrestling on. Now every channel is the same channel. So, but there was a Ring of Honor commercial on. I was like, oh my god, maybe wrestling's on tonight. But do you remember that? Like when you were a kid and you travel,
course,
and you
yeah.
pick, oh, like I'm in. We never went to Portland. We weren't rich, but when you go to Portland, like I'm gonna find what channel Portland's on, and maybe we'll get to go to a Don Owen show. We would beg my parents. Like,
I remember being so excited to find Global on ESPN.
Oh, yeah.
It was such a big deal for me.
and it was on like after school, which was like the perfect time
Yeah.
and every day. When we went down south on vacation one year, we were driving through Charlotte and we heard a radio commercial for a show that night. The next night, we were begging our parents to screw up our vacation. We already had reservations and all this. Can we just stay in Charlotte one more night and see the Nature Boy wrestle?
Yeah.
And my dad, he's like, kids, we paid all this money. I'm 8 years old, 9 years old. Like none of this makes sense to me. You know what I mean? Why can't we go see the Road Warriors?
Well, how do we go from there? You're a fan, to finally deciding, hey, you know what? Let me give this a shot. How do you get in? How do you get your foot in the door to start training?
When did you start working?
Long after you, 99.
Okay, 99. So I started in 94, 95. Yeah. It's like back then, and maybe it was like this when you started. Like, it was more of like a secret society thing. Do you know what I mean? Like, you didn't know, there weren't schools. Like, you didn't know who trained. Like, I always knew I wanted to do it, but it was a pipe dream. Do you know what I mean? Because, like, how...
I know exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, and it's like, and too, like now, like you and I would be bigger guys. And like, but back then, I was small as it gets. You know what I mean? Like, T was one of the bigger guys here. I'm 2 foot shorter than him. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
And so I was like, yeah, it's never going to happen. But I dreamed about it all the time. And then Steel City started running shows. We were going to a lot of ECW shows. And anytime there were shows, we had a whole crew of people who would go to every show. So we got to know Norm pretty well. And he would always tell us, I'm going to run this company. He was friends with, this is when like Tri-State was running and Philly pre-ECW. And then Joel Goodhart shows and like TW. Like there was like this influx of like East Coast indie shows were starting to happen. And he's like, I'm going to do that in Pittsburgh. And we're kind of, whatever. And he gradually kept getting closer and closer to it. So I was in art school and starting to learn what I do for a living now. And he said, I need a logo for my company. He goes, there's a guy that came here from LA and he studied lucha, which I was obsessed with at the time. And he said, he needs somebody to wrestle. He'll train you if you do the logo for me. And I was like, oh, okay. Do you know what I mean? So that's how I got in. And then I had to relearn everything going. So, because then you learn lucha and
Sure.
you're all going off the rates. So then when I stopped wrestling him, the first guy I wrestled after him was Mark Hildebrand when he did the Ninja Turtle gimmick. And I went to lock up with him. He's like, what are you doing? I'm like, what? He's like, you're on the wrong arm. And I was like, what do you mean? And he's like, well, you only know Lucha, huh? I'm like, yeah. So then he kicked me in the face a whole bunch of times. And then in back, he explained to me, he's like, you got to learn how to work the other side of the body. So then once I did that, it kind of really helped, because then I think I always, in a weird way, like, from maybe, and this isn't putting myself over, it's putting myself under, like, I watched too much wrestling. So I knew, like, how to put a match together. You kind of know the idea of, like, no one ever smartened me up, but I got to realize, like, here's when the face is taking over, here's when the heel is. And I think I was always prepping for that. Like, I have notebooks from when I was a kid of, like, finishes and angles and, like, how matches ended. Because I would just write them down because, like, I wanted to remember them. Or, like, a move I'd never seen, we would write them down. And we made, like, our own board games of wrestling that, like, figured out the psychology of putting a match together. And it's just being a mark, a super mark. Whatever's beyond otaku, as they say in Japan, like someone that lives the life that they want to do before they live the life of it. And so I think it was just a natural thing. I promised my parents that I would finish college before I did anything in wrestling. And literally, I graduated and left my graduation to go to wrestling school and to do my first class. And in Bridgeville, at a gym that was just a boxing gym. It didn't have a wrestling ring, no spring, hard. You know,
Awesome.
You've been in those,
Yes.
And I was like, and finally, like, he said, we should just practice these bumps on the floor because this is the same thing. So, like, when people say to me, like, you do all this crazy stuff on concrete, it's like, yeah, I trust concrete more than most rings now because I know concrete's going to suck. But I know that you've been in horrible rings, so, like, I think that's how I got that psychology. But yeah, so that's a roundabout answer to a simple question.
So beyond working the wrong side, what are
Yeah.
some of the early obstacles you remember when you first sort of broke in, started training, having your first few matches? Beyond that, what were some of the early obstacles?
My first match was in Newcastle, which is where I grew up going to independent shows in the next town over. And I was like, there was like a 10-person show, and like Jake Roberts was on it. It's like before Meanie was Meanie, he was on it. Dan Severin, I think who else? It was like a round, and there was like a Japanese touring group that came in to watch the show. Geza Kalman Jr. was like a somewhat big guy. He did UFC. Main event was like T and Cactus was the main event. And like, so all these, Iron Sheik was on it. There were some really big guys on it. They put me up like 7th on this show because I was from around there because, I'm going to sell tickets on this.
Mm-hmm.
And my first match, and no one ever told me if the ref's in the corner what to do. And I'm freaking out this whole show. And the worst thing about this show, this is scatological, but I feel I can tell you this. There were no walls in the locker room. Do you know what I mean? It was just like toilet stalls.
Okay.
And so I had to keep going to the bathroom because I was so nervous. And like Cactus is right there, and this is a dude I've obviously idolized for years. And he kept saying, "Sam, having trouble, getting nervous." I'm like, "Yeah, kind of shit." like in front of Iron Sheik. I don't know if I can say that.
Yeah, of course. Anything you like.
Yeah. So like, and then the first spot of the match, I get whipped to the corner, and I'm supposed to take the buckle, come out, take an arm drag out. The ref's just standing there like, no one ever told me what to do. So I danced the whole way around the ref into the corner, and I took the goofiest bump into the corner, and just the crowd just started laughing. It's like first match, and I'm like super serious at this point. I had no idea how to take a joke. So every bump I took after that, I just tried to kill myself, like big crazy bumps. And I remember Cactus met me at the curtain. He's like, "You took some really crazy bumps." He's like, "You did a good job first match." I said, "Yeah." It's like that first move, I haven't seen anybody take it a corner like that since like maybe like long pause. Like Missy Hyatt, like she's somebody who would take a corner like that. And I was like, oh, and like I was just destroyed. And I remember I dated a girl up there. I remember going to her house and just crying on her porch about it. I was so upset about it. And she hated wrestling. She did not understand, like, that I waited my whole life to have this match. But I think the biggest problem was, and I think you may have ran into this, is like there weren't shows.
Sure.
Like you would go 3 months, 6 months to get on a show. That's what blows my mind now when guys aren't like into their matches. Like you have a show, especially in this area, you have a show every weekend if you want a show, or every other weekend, or at least every month here. And it's like, man, I remember one year I went like 10 months, and I was looking hard for shows. Like you'd get in a car, maybe you get into a battle royal, maybe you get into something. But it was pre-internet too. Like you couldn't like canvas out for shows. I remember like promoters would send you directions via phone. It wouldn't tell you north or south, east, west on the roads. They would just tell you, take 79 to here. And you get so lost, and nobody had cell phones. And like, so you were always late to shows. Now, like, that's another advantage guys have now. It's like, just get on your phone, and you look, and you get the show. So it was a lot different. I think it was just getting on shows and then getting known, getting a name across. And then, like, I honestly know the first 2 years I worked, I had no idea how to tell a story. I just knew how to take stupid bumps, like crazy bumps, and I knew how to put together a couple moves. But I didn't know that my job was to lead the audience and put him through this thing. I was just like, yeah, I'm just out here to die. Do you know what I mean?
Let's say right now, I had the ability to send you back in time. What year was that first match?
95.
Okay, so I could send you back in time to
Yeah.
1995.
Yeah.
What would you today tell that person right before he walked out the curtain?
You should get boots.
That's the only thing.
No, just in general, just for the match, or for
For the voyage that was ahead.
don't get married the first time. No, I'm just kidding. I don't. You know what? I'm of this belief that like you do all these mistakes because then otherwise you have to become this person. I think the advice I would give myself in wrestling is be more positive. Because I think a lot of times I tend to dwell on the negative, and like that's something I've really tried to do the last couple of years is just try to be more positive. Because there's a lot of negativity that happens in wrestling, and it's how you deal with it that kind of makes you who you are. But that's, I mean, the last too long, 23 years, almost 23 years in July. It's a long time. That's longer than these kids have been alive. Like that's what scares me. Like Silas said that to me a couple shows ago. I was telling him, he's like, when was your first match? And I was like, I think it's like August 7th, 1995 is my first match. And he was like, man, I wasn't even born. And I was like, shut up.
We're going to make a big jump in time here. We're up to 2004, 2005.
Yeah.
In my research, I think that was the time you went to Japan on a few tours, correct?
First time, yeah. And I went in 2008 or 9 too, yeah.
What was that like for you?
That's all I wanted to do in wrestling. Like, I never had dreams of WWE because I knew I didn't have the look, obviously, and I think I had gotten into advertising, so like I knew that like wrestling wasn't going to be a career. It was going to be something that helped my life and made my life better, but like it wasn't going to be everything I did. And I think, but my biggest goal was just to go to Japan because I've been obsessed with Japanese culture since I was a little kid. Because like I think we had like anime, like Speed Racer and Battle of the Planets, and even like Mobile Suit Gundam came over in the early '80s, like Robotech, Star Blazers, like even Godzilla. Like anytime we'd go, when we were little kids and we'd go to Cedar Point and see like Japanese tourists there, I always wanted to talk to them, to ask them questions about Japan. As a little kid, like, why am I bothering this dude asking him? He wants to experience America. He doesn't want to talk about Japan. And like I think just my dream was to wrestle there. So the first tour was like 2 weeks over Golden Week, which was like a big. It's going on right now actually, a big celebration week, and it was awesome because we did like so many shows, and I got to work like a lot of different people, work for a lot of different companies, and it wasn't anything. We got on like one show on Samurai, which is their all wrestling channel, and we got on a couple tapes and stuff, but it wasn't like we were for New Japan or anything. It was like the same level we are here, but it was awesome though. You know what I mean? Because like the fact that that's when you get to a point in wrestling when promoters are paying you to come in, and you're making enough, not just for gas, but enough that you have a couple bucks left over for the week, and then when promoters are like, hey, I'm going to pay to take you out of this country into my country and work, like that's pretty awesome. So it was a good feeling, you know what I mean? And it was fun. It was a lot of work. It was a lot of fun too, you know what I mean? Got to go to a lot of places. My brother went with me, which was really cool, because we got to share that experience. Then he went off shopping for a couple of days, but because he hates wrestling, he got a couple days of like being in there. The first night we were there, like I had come over and they wanted me to teach in their school, in their dojo, which was cool because they heard, like Dory Funk helped teach me. And so they were like, will you get into our school and work out with us? Yeah. And then I remember one of their guys said, oh, you actually know how to wrestle. Like, you're a pretty good wrestler. I'm like, oh, thanks. Like, I felt really good about that. And I was like, man, maybe I'll get to wrestle tonight and not do all the stupid stuff that I do. And like, as I was getting in the ring, they had taken down all the ropes, and it was all barbed wire, and they had the light tubes in the corner and thumbtacks in this other corner, and I was like, I don't think I'm going to get to wrestle. No one ever told me that we were doing this kind of match. Do you know what I mean? Like,
sure.
Not that I care.
Right.
Like, I like those kind of matches, but like I was on the way to the ring, and I said to the promoter, I said, you didn't tell me this was the kind of match I was doing. He's like, well, we gave you 17,000 yen. I was like, wow, that's a lot of money. 17,000 yen. $1,700. It's like $1,500.
Yeah.
And that's for like 11 matches, so it's not a lot of money.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? But at the time, like 17,000, I was like, yeah, and I just like ran out, and that's why I have a lot of marks on this one arm. But yeah.
How did you come about the name Shirley Doe?
Oh boy.